Oh, there she is. And we're here to
Hi.
chat with everyone about COVID vaccines and kids. Hi, it's so good to see you. It's been a while.
Likewise. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just still living through a global pandemic and trying to manage all the things. How about yourself?
Yeah, hanging in there. I think today is a bit of a rough day. I think just hearing all about
Mm.
the new variant of concern, and it's just, I guess, never ending.
It does really feel like that sometimes, for sure.
hmm
Do you have thoughts on the variant of concern, or should we hop right into kids and
Yeah, it's a little too early to really fully understand what this variant of concern and how much it's going to impact us. I think we
Mhm.
need to wait to see before we really freak out. But absolutely, I think that it's important to keep in the back of our mind and actually be proactive. With respect to this new variant, I think in the
Yeah.
past we've sort of let alpha and then delta sweep over before we
Mhm.
actually did anything concrete to try and limit its transmission. But I think that now that we're aware of what can happen with the new variant of concern, we should be on top of it and ensure that it's actually not something that could jeopardize the success we've had so far with cases and vaccines.
The success in like wealthy nations, I guess, is probably the best way to properly cover
Exactly.
that.
That's exactly
Um,
it.
yeah, because it does kind of feel like if we had a global vaccine equitable distribution, that perhaps we wouldn't be dealing with this right now, and instead
Exactly.
we'd be celebrating a worldwide win as opposed to trying to protect a win in the north or the global
That's
north.
it. And we won't be safe until everyone is safe. And this is going to keep happening, which is why it's one of those topics, with respect to global vaccine equity. I know people always say, oh, that's happening in a different country, but it's not as though viruses know borders. They don't really
Yeah.
understand, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be and not here. So what's happening in a different country will, at some point or the other, impact us here. And so, really, not only is making sure that the whole world has access to vaccines and therapies is important from a humane and equity point of view, but in fact, it is in our best interest to do that as well. So, really, in my mind, it's a complete no-brainer.
Yeah, let's hope that the leaders of the wealthy nations also recognize that this is like we can't go back to normal, quote unquote, um, unless everyone is able to return to things safely, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
going to work without that. But I know most of the people who are joining us today are here to chat about COVID vaccines and kids. I myself do not have children. Um, so like this, it's honestly, it's sort of horrible to say this, but it's gone over my head a little bit over the last little bit. And the only reason we were paying attention to it at all, other than the fact that we want kids to be vaccinated and safe, is we got so many messages from people in our community asking about um, all the things that you would like. I think you're a parent, yes? I feel like I've
I
preached you, and I
am.
do know that you're a parent.
I
Yeah. So,
am. I'm the mom to a 4.5, almost 5-year-old. He likes to tell people he's 4 3/4 because that's
ooh,
exceptionally
ooh,
important. And for a while, he
yeah.
was 4 2/3. So he's very precise about
I
exactly
love the
how old he
fractions.
is. I know,
Yeah,
me too. I'm
yeah.
like, oh, you're learning fractions. But importantly, he is under 5. And that to me is really heartbreaking because I am seeing vaccines being available to kids who are over 5. And he's
Mhm.
this close, but he's not eligible at this point. And am so excited about this for other parents, and personally I'm just also crying a little on the inside that he's not eligible yet.
Yeah. Well, soon,
Soon,
if his
soon.
math is right, then soon. Um,
Yeah.
so let's talk about maybe, and if you're joining us, everyone, we're talking about COVID vaccines and kids. Feel free to drop your questions in there. I do have a list that people sent to us, but the first, like, sort of overwhelming question that I sort of saw was, is it safe? And I feel like we should start there because that's probably where most parents are. Um, yeah, is it safe to get
Yeah.
this for your kids
Yeah.
between 5 and 12 or 11?
um yeah, 5 to 11. Yeah, you know what, and I totally understand that question. And again, it really comes down to the bottom line here is that us as parents, the first and primary responsibility we have is to keep our children safe. So absolutely, there is nothing that we would do to our child if it jeopardizes their health and their
Mm-hmm.
well-being. And so this question on safety is a really, really important question, and one that I personally am also really invested in as well. So I can take you through some of the data that we've seen in the clinical trials, and then I'll also talk a little about what we know so far. So when Pfizer did its clinical trials, they had approximately 4,500 children who were enrolled in the 5 to 11 age range. They had more in the 11 plus, and they have more in the under 5 age range as well. But in the 5 to 11, they had 4,500, of which 3,000 got the actual vaccine. And in these 3,000 that they studied, the side effect profile was actually, for the most part, very equal to what the placebo arm was getting. So first of all, it was super well tolerated. Most of the children had something, things that were very, very minor. So like a sore arm, an achy arm. And in fact, even things like fever that we see very often in adults after they get their vaccines, we hardly saw any fever after the vaccines in the pediatric trials. And that's because kids
Oh.
have a slightly different immune system. And so it was so well tolerated in children. Now, the one question I get very often when it comes to safety is, what about myocarditis? Because it is, something that we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing, especially with some of the younger males, that where we've seen a higher incidence of myocarditis after the mRNA vaccines. Now, myocarditis in general tends to peak in young males who are 16 to 17 years old. So that's really the peak of myocarditis in general, outside of vaccines. And and not surprisingly, we see it follow a similar trend even after the vaccines. So what we've seen with both Pfizer and Moderna is that there is a slight increase in myocarditis after the second dose, and especially in men who are in that 16 to 17, in fact, up to 24 age range. But the myocarditis we're seeing with the vaccines tend to be much more milder. And this is because myocarditis and other heart issues, in fact, occur very often with infections, with COVID-19 infections. So COVID-19 infections has been shown to have a profound effect on your entire, cardiac system, your heart. And myocarditis is basically the inflammation of the membrane and the lining of your heart. And so we see this happen very often with COVID-19 infections. And when they occur with infections, they tend to be a lot more severe. However, when they're occurring with the vaccines, A, they occur less frequently with the vaccines, and B, they tend to be a lot milder. And in fact, if you look even to see comparing hospitalizations that have occurred due to myocarditis
Mm-hmm.
versus hospitalizations that have occurred due to COVID-19 infections, you'll see with myocarditis, the average length of stay in a hospital is 1 day. It's usually just okay, let's check you up, make sure you're good, and here's what you can do at home. You can rest, you can take anti-inflammatories, and this is how you manage it. Whereas when we see some of these, very devastating effects of COVID-19 infections, they tend to be much longer stays. And in fact, even in the older age range group, the average length of stay at the hospital is 6 days with
Mm-hmm.
COVID infections, versus with vaccinations, it's just a day on average due to myocarditis. So there's not just an impact with respect to frequency, i.e., 6 to 16 times higher risk of myocarditis with infections. But again, when they occur, they are much more severe with infections. And when they occur with vaccines,
Right.
they tend to be really mild. So I think putting that into context and perspective is really important, because parents are at a point now where if, with the way how Delta especially is so transmissible, and with new variants coming into play, and schools are fully reopened, the economy is basically going back to opening everything up. At some point, you're going to be exposed to COVID. And at that point, what do you want to, have in terms of your risks, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
want to take calculated risks with the vaccines that you understand are generally mild, but will protect your child from things like hospitalization due to COVID? Or even if you have mild COVID, you can have things like multi-inflammatory syndromes called MIS-C, You can
Mm-hmm.
have long COVID. You can have other post-acute issues as well. So what do you want to do as a parent? What chances are you willing to take at this point, given that we know at some point or the other, children are going to be exposed to COVID? So that really is the crux of it. You know, you're doing a risk-benefit analysis. You have to
Mm.
understand the entire picture that is at play.
I feel like that's my biggest takeaway from everything I've learned from you this year is you're doing a risk benefit sort of scenario of things, and that makes sense. I mean, we make those, you said this to me once, we make those all the time.
Yes.
It's not just with vaccines or the COVID vaccine, but we're making risk benefits in our data analysis in our day-to-day lives, in how we decide what we decide to do, how we do it. um, this one, there's just a lot of stuff around because we're all going through it at the exact same time, versus normally you're not checking in with like the entire world around some of these risk benefits.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that we're, you know, in the last year and a half, we're in a heightened sense of flight or fright, right? Because we're
Mm,
in the middle of a pandemic. So every decision we're making, you know, comes with that, with the fear, with the adrenaline, with the are we doing the right thing? We're in a constant state of fear and you know, flight or fright basically for the last year and a half. So every decision ends up being a lot more amplified as well than it would be in a normal situation. You know,
right.
and like on the you know, and to explain that further, just as an example, children get routinely vaccinated for a variety of different diseases. You know, to their when a child goes to school, you have to show essentially proof of immunization, and we immunize children for diseases that actually cause fewer deaths than COVID does on a
Wow.
regular basis. So if you compare the pediatric deaths we've had with COVID versus that for rubella, for instance, with the
Mm,
MMR vaccine, meningococcal disease, with all of these diseases, COVID actually causes more pediatric deaths than any of these, right? And so again, putting into context, you go to see your family doctor, you know your child is due for their routine vaccinations. You get their routine vaccinations, you walk out, you don't even think twice about it. But you know, again, like we're in a situation where everything is heightened because our sense of like well-being is like, you know, um, at a peak right now, you know, where we're
mm.
trying to make sure we're keeping ourselves safe, keeping our children safe, keeping our parents and grandparents safe. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Yeah, and I imagine for parents, like not only has this been crazy as a year for themselves, and also, you know, they're looking out for their parents, like who are now grandparents to their kids, but also like managing all the changes children have been through. Like I don't envy having to deal with all of this and now make a choice around the vaccine. But I mean, like you were saying, the side effects were super minimal, if not like barely there, less than it was for adults that got vaccinated. Um, and America already did vaccines for kids. So what have we learned from that?
Yeah, so the US, I was actually looking at updated numbers today, and CDC has a fantastic tracker. And so as of today, the US has given more than 3.6 million doses to the 5 to 11 age range
Cool.
because they were a couple of weeks ahead of us. Now, you know, I do want to caution that we're in early days, so we probably don't have full information yet because it does take a couple of weeks, you know, if there are any side effects for them to be reported, they have to be adjudicated, i.e. make sure that it's actually, you know, have it checked out and make sure that it's actually what symptoms are being
Mm-hmm.
reported are actually corresponding to the, you know, condition that we're reporting. So that's, you know, basic adjudication. And then we have to make sure we take all of those numbers and analyze and see what the trends look like, whether it's a higher risk or not. So all of this can take a couple of weeks. And then of course, you know, reporting and publishing that. So it can take a couple of weeks. So we're a little too soon to conclusively say, you know, that everything is going great there. But if there was something that we saw that was of huge concern, we would have seen it by now. By now, we would have gotten, you know, those signals that would convey that there is something that is, you know,
Right.
not as expected or something out of the ordinary. If that was happening, we would absolutely have seen that by now. So I'm waiting to see what we're looking at. So far, it seems like the myocarditis is like almost negligible in this population.
That's great. Yeah.
And again, it's because myocarditis in general is lower in children who are under ages, at 16 to 17 it peaks, and then it reduces up to age 12, and then under
Mm,
age 12 it's expected to be even lower. So we're already expecting that the rates that we would see in the 5 to 11 is going to be much, much lower than what we've seen in the 12 plus. And so far, it seems like that's exactly how the vaccinations are going in the US. But again, we need a couple more weeks so that we can actually get some of these, really solid, concrete reports out so we can actually do a better estimate of what the incidence is. But it's expected to be much lower in the 5 to 11 age range.
it's so good to hear. I mean, like, what a relief, right? Um, Something that we got a lot of questions around was what should parents watch in their children after they get the vaccine for, like, if it is like one of those like crazy adverse effects. And like, I feel like the chances of that are super low, but a lot of people are like, what do I watch for and how do I manage anything that may come up?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we, always do, even at the vaccine clinic, wherever you're getting your vaccine, there's a reason why you're asked to wait for 15 minutes.
Right.
And that's because there is a small risk of possibly having an allergic reaction. And again, an allergic reaction can happen to anything you can, ingest, consume, eat, there's always that risk of having an allergic reaction to it. It's just that's
Mm-hmm.
how our immune systems are, that's how our bodies are. And so that's why they make you wait for 15 minutes, because there is around between 2.5 to 5 cases per million of possible allergic reactions called anaphylaxis. So they make you wait for that. And usually, when you're having an allergic reaction, it's pretty obvious at that time.
Right.
So, for sure, keep an eye on that. But again, you're made to wait at a clinic so that they can observe you and make sure you're doing okay after the vaccine. Once you come home, of course, keep an eye on your child, make sure your child, is not spiking a fever. If they are, speak to your doctor to see what you can do
Mm-hmm.
about that. But again, even in the clinical trials, less than 2% actually had a fever. So very, very rare to actually have some of those, side effects. And again, with myocarditis, the symptoms would generally feel, the feeling of a pounding heart or a fluttering heart. Your child will basically tell you they're not feeling well, because sometimes if they're especially young, towards the 5 or 6 age range, they may not be able to fully verbalize how they're feeling. So generally, it's a feeling of feeling uneasy, and they might be more tired. They might want to might be more fatigued after their vaccine. But again, some of these things are expected from the vaccine, and you just keep
Mm-hmm.
an eye out. If you're concerned, speak to your doctor. But again, for the most part, the vaccine was so well tolerated in the 5 to 11 age range, and so I want parents to feel, I know it's great. I know it's nerve-wracking. It's always nerve-wracking when you take your child in for any health visit, any physician visit. But I want them to also go in feeling, empowered about this as they're going in to get their child
Mm-hmm.
vaccinated.
That's so awesome. Um, and I think, are there, another question that we had, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Another question that we had was people asking if there were children with pre-existing conditions or anything of that nature that meant that they shouldn't get the vaccine. And we've been responding being like, talk to your primary healthcare provider, because I feel like that's very specific. But is there generally anything that people should know around children and vaccines and who shouldn't be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's actually at this point no, um, if they have any pre-existing condition, if anything, it actually puts them at a higher risk of having severe illness to COVID. So if you do have a
Right.
pre-existing condition, for sure, speak to your doctor if you have questions specific to your situation. But for the most part, there aren't any contraindications to getting vaccinated. The couple of things that I do want people to keep in mind is that if you know your child has an allergy to one of the ingredients in the vaccine, then what I would recommend is actually speaking to your doctor and getting a referral to an allergy clinic. Allergists have been doing these fantastic vaccine clinics where if may have an allergy to a specific ingredient, or if you had a reaction to the first dose, how to get your second dose safely. They've been doing this since the start of the pandemic, so they're a
Cool.
fantastic resource. And in fact, more than 87, I believe, or 88% of people who had a severe allergic reaction to dose one were able to go get their second dose with no issues at an
Yay.
allergist's office. So there's definitely something that you can do on that front. The second guidance is for those who may have had myocarditis with dose one. If you have it with dose one, what NACI recommends is to not get dose two at this point. If you have myocarditis that is unrelated to COVID vaccines for some other reason,
Mm.
what they do suggest is if you're under acute care for that with a doctor, speak to your doctor. But if it was in the past and you're not under any care for that right now, it's okay for you to go ahead and get the vaccine. And then the last bucket is children who had MIS-C, so that multi-inflammatory condition that I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about. If you've had MIS-C due to COVID-19 infection, then what they recommend is to wait 90 days or until you're fully recovered. And this is because MIS-C is actually a really serious disease. It's not something simple. It's actually it causes inflammation in several different body parts, and 90% of cases of MIS-C have inflammation and actually involve more than 4 organ systems. So it would be lungs, heart, brain,
Mm.
gastrointestinal system. So these are very, very involved, very serious conditions. That can occur due to COVID-19 infections. And there was actually a publication that just came out from the Public Health Agency of Canada, where they looked at MIS-C cases in Canada, because we didn't have a lot of data on this. We know that that their hospitals have seen this, pediatric hospitals have seen it, but we didn't have data on how many. And we had nearly 300 children in Canada, despite the fact that in most provinces, schools were closed for the last year and a half, and that there were risk mitigation, processes in place across. Despite all of that, we had 300 children in Canada that ended up getting MIS-C.
Mm.
And so again, this is something that is a very severe and serious complication of COVID-19 infections. And in children who've had this, the recommendation is to wait at least 90 days after or until all your symptoms have cleared before you get the vaccine. But other than that, there are no specific contraindications to getting it. But never hurts to speak to your doctor, especially just to have another chat, another
Right.
conversation with a trusted healthcare provider. If you have other questions, always good to speak with your doctor as well. So absolutely speak to your doctor if you have any concerns or questions about your specific child and their, health history.
That's really awesome. Thank you. Someone put a question in, but it scrolled past asking, MIS-C is not a result of the vaccine itself.
No,
But
so MIS-C is not caused by the vaccine at all. There is 0 cases of MIS-C that occur due to the vaccine. All of the cases of MIS-C occur due to COVID-19 infections.
mm,
And it's interesting also because MIS-C can happen in children even if they had a really mild COVID-19 infection. So
well,
it's not as though that if you have a severe COVID-19 infection, you go on to have MIS-C. In fact, many of the cases of MIS-C happen in very mild cases, and the 5 to 11 age range is actually at the highest risk for MIS-C. So if you look at all the cases of MIS-C that have occurred, even in Canada or in the US, you see that the highest percentage have occurred in that 5 to 11 age range. So this is actually a very critical period for children going on to develop MIS-C due to a COVID-19 infection.
well,
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And,
it is.
I mean,
It
as parents, we never want to see or think about our child being in a hospital. It's one of those things that we've, unfortunately in the past, have had situations where I've had to take my son to the ER, being
Mm,
kept overnight, and it's not something I would wish, on any parent, because it's stressful, and
sure, yeah.
it's scary as as a parent, seeing especially small children, and for my son, it was actually due to RSV, which. The interesting thing is Moderna is actually now looking at a vaccine against RSV, and honestly, like that just gives me life to know that we actually have a possibility of having. So RSV is one of those things that we've been trying to create a vaccine for many years. We just have not had a successful vaccine.
What is
um,
RSV?
RSV is another type of respiratory virus. So it's respiratory I always mess up the second word. I can't say it very well, but it's a
Okay, words are
respiratory
hard.
syncytial virus. So it's like a virus that really impacts your respiratory system as well.
Mm.
For most people who are not children or older adults, you'll be sick. You'll be sick for a couple of days. You might need to take some time off work, but you'll be fine. Um, Children who are really young, so under the ages of 5, and especially children who are under the ages of 2, and older adults, so those who are over 65, are actually at a really high risk for RSV. And RSV actually contributes to, mortality, to death as well in Canada,
No.
as does influenza. So, I mean, there are a lot of different viruses that are not pretty in children and in older adults. And so, here's a little plug to go get your influenza vaccine as well, especially before the holidays,
Yeah.
just to make sure that you're mitigating possible risks from, not just COVID-19 viruses, but other viruses as well. It's really important.
We're trying to keep these tighter to the 30 minutes because sometimes we just keep chatting.
Ooh.
But we did get one question submitted. And I thought that that was a nice little wrap up question before we. Um,
Is it do the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks?
yeah.
I love that question. I love it. Thank you for asking this question because I think it's a fantastic question. And so we actually have amazing analyses that were done by the FDA and the CDC independently looking at this question
Mm-hmm.
before the vaccine was approved in the US. And then we had similar analyses done over here by NACI as well before it was approved in Canada. And CDC actually published their risk benefits in a fantastic way. And in fact, what they did is they took the higher upper limit of myocarditis, so the
Right.
highest possible risk, and then they took the lowest possible risk of COVID-19, just so that whatever differences were going to be there were going to be really drastic, just to make sure, because especially in kids, you want to make sure that the vaccine is not just beneficial, but it's
Mm-hmm.
far more beneficial than the risks. So, with kids, the differential is very different. You want to make sure that you're not putting children at any harm, by any means. And so there's a lot that goes into making sure that it's considered beneficial in children, and the threshold is really high for that bar. And so they looked at different cases and different scenarios, and what they found is in every single scenario the vaccine's benefits far outweigh the risks. And this is just looking at hospitalization, just looking at mortality and looking at hospitalization due to COVID-19. Does not even include things like post-acute issues, MIS-C, or long COVID. So if you just look at basic
Mm-hmm.
hospitalization and deaths, in every single scenario, the benefits of the vaccine far, far outweigh the risks. And that was really reassuring to me to see as a parent. I combed through those graphs, and for me, seeing that really solidified that the vaccine is the right call for children. And especially because I do want to end off on a more positive note. I think children have sacrificed so much over the last year and a half. It's been tough on them. It's been tough. I have a
Mm-hmm.
pandemic baby who does not remember what life was before the pandemic. And what I want to give to him, of course, I want to make sure he's healthy. And of course, I want to make sure he doesn't get sick. And of course, I want to make sure that he doesn't die. But I also want him to get back to doing the things that we love doing, right? I want them to get back to, going to school and not having to be worried, going back to extracurricular activities, going back to playing with his friends and having parties and slumber parties and all of that fun stuff that I remember from my own childhood as things that I love to do, right? And it's hard as a parent seeing that you can't offer the same to your child. And so for
Mhm.
me, not only do the vaccines benefit, with all of the things on the health side, but they also benefit with allowing them to get back to the lives that they've lost. And especially in children years, as I call them, it's a long time. It's a long time for them to have to
For sure.
sacrifice so much.
Um, well, thank you so much for chatting with us. Um, you post such amazing evidence-informed info about COVID-19, well, COVID-19 and like vaccines and everything that if anyone here wants more, you can check out Unambiguous Science. It's one of my favorite stops when I'm like, okay, I need to figure things out. So please check that out, everybody. And we'll link that in. We'll save this live and link it and do all that stuff as we usually do. But thank you so much for coming and helping people hopefully feel more comfortable with vaccinating their kids. So
It's my pleasure. And if anyone has other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions. I think that, you know, the one thing that I actually really want to do is allow parents and empower them to make these informed decisions for themselves where they feel confident. And it's not that
mhm,
they're doing this because they're told to do this, because they're mandated to do this. Like I personally feel it has to come, you know, as from the parent using their own decision making and informed
yeah.
decision empowering decision making. So I'm always happy to chat with anyone if they have any questions to get them to the point where they feel confident about it.
Well, that's so awesome, and thank you so much.
It's my
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, thanks everybody for hanging out. Take care.
Take care. Bye.